There's something about being a podcast listener, enthusiast, engaging at all in podcasts. There's something about it that's different, I feel, than simply listening to music or watching TV or watching movies. Or there's something more personal about it. I've never been able to fully put my finger on this, but at least for me, listening to podcasts over time, particularly once you become a fan of a particular show or a particular host or whatever, you listen to them over time and you almost feel like you've developed a relationship with them in some way, like you know them in some way when you don't, you know. I mean, obviously, unless you've met them or you do know them or whatever, but I'm just talking about from a distance. If you've done nothing to engage with this person other than just listen to their show or shows, somehow it feels like a very personal relationship when in fact it's completely one-sided, right? It's really no different than being a big fan of a musician or being a big fan of an actor or whatever. But for some reason, and maybe it's just me, for some reason it feels different to me. My best guesses on this really have always come down to two things. One, you're often listening to podcasts, or at least I'm often listening to podcasts, when I'm alone. When it's usually when I'm driving in the car by myself, or maybe I'm walking or sitting somewhere or whatever, and I have, a pair of AirPods or headphones or whatever. So it becomes this very one-on-one sort of thing where, you're driving on your own, but now you have voices that you're listening to kind of thing. So that's one piece of it. And also the earphone thing, right? You're putting, if you're using earphones, listen to podcasts a lot, that's very intense or personal, The other thing that I think it could come down to is simply the typical longevity of shows. If you listen to long-running shows, they can go for 3, 5, 10 years putting out weekly content. So over time, it's possible that you've heard 200, 300, 400 episodes of whoever it is you're listening to speaking, and over time it just kind of sinks into your brain as a staple of your life. So I don't know. It's always just seemed a little different to me than consuming other kinds of media. This episode here, this may become. I kind of have a hope that this becomes maybe a monthly or every a couple month segment of things. I don't know. There are some problems with trying to sustain that, I think, and I'll go into those in a minute. But the general idea here is that I listen to quite a few podcasts. I really enjoy them as a medium. So I want to put out some recommendations, not of whole podcasts, but of specific episodes. And then maybe that becomes something of a gateway into enjoying that particular show. Maybe you already listened to the show, whatever. But I'm not going to do a big long list or anything. But as I listen to shows, sometimes one really jumps out at me. Maybe I listen to the same show every week or whatever. But once in a while, they just have a hell of an episode, So that's what this is about. So here's my 3 that I've come up with for this month or for this period of time, or maybe I only do this once and never do it again. Who knows? The first one I actually talked about, I believe, last episode. This is a show called You Are Not So Smart, episode 317. And by the way, these will be linked in the notes. So I talked in the last episode a lot about how there was an interesting study that came out of this. If you want, go take a listen to that. But the rest of this episode, he had a guest on that was... They're talking largely about the ability to discuss things like politics and how to go about approaching that in a way that works in the modern world. Regardless of what side of the fence you're on politically, I don't think it's a stretch or a hot take to say that it's become more and more difficult for people with opposing political viewpoints to have conversation around those viewpoints. And I'm not even really talking about the whole topic of trying to change someone's mind or convince them or debate or anything else. I'm just talking about the bare bones of just being able to discuss things. So that, among other topics, are discussed on this particular episode. It's not a political episode necessarily, but it sort of goes into conversation about how to discuss things and also the history of where political discussion came from. So it's a sort of the reason I like this episode a lot is it's sort of a combination of a few things. There's sort of history in it. There's some interesting studies called out. There's some interesting tips and tidbits, and the guest is really, really good. So if any of those topics, jump out to you, I would suggest taking a listen to that one. It was a really good episode. Second episode is the Sunday Story from NPR. I bumped into this on the Up First feed. I listen to Up First from NPR every morning. It's about the maximum amount of news that I can tolerate before it's just more than I want to deal with. But this, on Sundays, they bring in some special stories and things like that aren't just daily news. This episode from July 6th of 2025 was called When News Broke. And it was a really interesting dive, from my perspective, into how news media, particularly political news media, and particularly partisan political news media, kind of came into existence and spun out of, not necessarily a position of neutrality in the past. Like, not that news was always reported in a neutral way before this, but how it spun out of really some other problematic patterns, and how we sort of got to where we are now with very partisan news sources, and on both sides of the fence, and people who really most people who follow politics largely pay attention to one side or the other, and it becomes something of an echo chamber. And again, both sides of the fence. So that was really interesting history deep dive for me. I was not aware of most of what it went into. It's about, as I recall, half an hour long, something like that. Really interesting kind of historic dive into how we ended up with news media and political news media in the way that we sort of approach it and consume it today. The third episode that I would recommend is from a show called Reconcilable Differences. It's episode 262. Now, this goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning. This is a show hosted by two podcasters who I've been following for well over a decade, as it turns out at this point. One guy's named Merlin Mann, and one guy who has largely in the past done topics around productivity and some other shows that he's done. And I've just listened to him for years. I find him both entertaining and really interesting to listen to. Another guy, John Siracusa, who has largely been in the tech space, particularly in the Apple tech space, does a number of podcasts. The two of them do this show together where they tackle any number of topics, often around personal history or kids or just whatever. I've been kind of in and out with this show over the years, so I haven't heard every episode ever, but I tapped back in because I heard this was a really good episode, and I agree. 262. It's called Everybody's Got a Tunnel. It goes into a number of things, but one of the really interesting things that it talks about is it tries to examine the nuances between what's a goal, what's an accomplishment, what's a task. It's sort of productivity related, but it also kind of brings up a number of more, personal things that I found very relatable through time. And this is a good example of two hosts that I've been following for a while that, and not in a creepy way, but I almost feel like I have a relationship with these people, but I don't. I don't know them at all. I've never met them. I find the things that they go through and the things that they bring up very interesting. So if you're interested at all about, I don't know, you could apply this the reason it's a very abstract episode, but the reason I like it so much is you could apply it to almost anything. If you are interested in your development personally or professionally, or you do project management for a living, or you do personal projects for a living, or, whatever your, I don't know, life scenario is, you'll probably find something in this episode worth considering and worth thinking about. Plus, these two hosts are absolute vets when it comes to podcasting and just do a great job at keeping both an entertaining show rolling as well as just bringing interesting topics to the table. So take a listen if you get a chance. Those are my three here, and they will be linked. Again, it's You Are Not So Smart, episode 317. It's The Sunday Story from July 6th. And it's Everybody's Got a Tunnel, episode 262 from Reconcilable Differences. Now, just to close things out here, again, I kind of have aspirations of doing this every so often, bringing three what I thought were really great episodes to the table. The problem is there's only so many hours in a day, and again, podcasting is kind of interesting because you're only going to bump into often the podcast episodes that you would be listening to anyway, and my catalog is not infinite. So I've been trying to think of some ways of expanding my own podcast horizons, like in terms of listening to great episodes. Because otherwise these recommendations are just going to become sort of the same, dozen shows that I recommend, like dozen podcasts with different episodes that I just recommend over and over again. And I don't know if that's wholly productive for myself or for anyone. So I don't know. We'll see where this goes. As I said, there tends to be episodes that pop up here and there that really seem exceptional. And I think that this is a good avenue to try to recommend some of those out to other people.